Quentin, you're coming out of Michigan and you're wondering if the existence of dissociative identity disorder is an argument against the existence of a soul. Could you do us a favor, and just for the audience and a little bit for me too, tell us a little bit more about dissociative identity disorder, and then let's talk about it.
So dissociative identity disorder is basically like the medical term for multiple personalities. It's just like, I believe what like people who actually study it refer to it, and that's like the correct medical term. And so over last Christmas, I was actually fortunate enough to meet someone with DID, and they were just an amazing human being. And they basically sat down with me and like answered a ton of questions that I had about the disorder, and like follow-up questions that like arose. I forget some of the questions I asked, but like a good amount were like really, really fascinating to me. And so recently I got thinking about like this very specific question and asked them directly, and they said they didn't know. So I posed it just sort of like to one theist I know, and like she didn't really have an answer for it. So the main idea is like dissociative identity disorder mainly occurs from trauma in childhood, and it's said to be like a defense mechanism. So the alters, as they're known, like form in the brain almost as like a protection to the original consciousness, if you want to refer to it as consciousness, but I'm not sure that's the proper term. And so there are multiple consciousnesses in one brain, and occasionally even like the original consciousness, or like the original, like whatever you want to refer to that as, like completely disappears. So like it would be almost as like, is that soul gone now? Are there more souls? I was wondering, probably you haven't, since you don't seem to know what the idea is, but maybe you've like come across that argument before with DS.
It's a really interesting question when we think about like extending this description onto treatment, because the treatment for dissociative identity disorder is to reintegrate all of these personalities. So if we were to, for pure thought's sake, assume there would be a soul, then that soul would have had to have broken up into a lot of different little bits and only be able to be brought back together by a skilled medical professional, which does seem very odd if that were to actually be a soul. I have a bit of background in this sort of thing, and what's really interesting to me is that there's still a debate amongst some folks in the psych field over how real DID even really is. Some people absolutely believe in it. Others actually believe that it's just a coping mechanism, and it doesn't go as far down as actually being truly distinct personalities. You also end up in the weird situation where some personalities will know about the others, but the others won't know about like maybe the primary personality. So it's fascinating and very confusing. What I would absolutely say is that because it can be treated by a medical professional, I feel like it's probably not a soul-based thing. So if you're trying to make it an argument against a soul, I would say that would be one, that if your soul can be treated by a doctor, that does seem a little weird. But the other thing being that, oh my gosh, I completely lost my train of thought. Doctors, souls. Oh, really? It's a great testimony to how the brain can try to keep us safe, how our brains, our physical brains, can respond to trauma in a way that will enable us to keep living is really fascinating. And that's what functionally DID is. So I don't know if I would whip it out as an argument against the existence of a soul necessarily, just because I think it is so complicated. And, you know, you've hit on how a lot of people don't even really know what it is. Yeah. And there's disagreement amongst professionals about, you know, how it even works. But I think it speaks a lot to our resilience as greater apes and the power of medicine and science to start treating these things. Yeah.
And I could just, if I want to put my bullshit hat on, which is what a lot of preachers do when they're
messy,
asking for money. you could suggest that the person who has this disorder has one soul, but their soul is damaged, that their spirit is damaged because of trauma, because of sin. The devil is interfering in some way, that their soul is fractured. And what they need to do is they need to unite their soul and dedicate themselves to a life of devotion to the one true God, or some bullshit like that I just made up off the top of my head. I don't think it's necessarily an argument for the existence of the soul. It could just be, because I think there is some recognizing certainly amongst progressive or even non-regressive Christians, that psychology is real, and that they might still recognize the existence of the soul, right? And perhaps in life they were harmed, but in heaven or wherever they will be made one.
That can
made whole.
lead down a whole lot of ugly areas. I think that it's interesting, even if we were to say someone maybe believes this idea of the soul being fractured, that it's medical professionals and secular science that cures it, not preachers, is worth noting.
Yeah.
I will say, though, I have never heard this argument before, and I just find it really cool whenever there's a totally different argument or idea that comes on.
Yeah, we've had some, and with that, final thoughts, Quentin? We're going to let you go. Any final thoughts?
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that in my discussions with the system that had DID, they stated that they were reunited at one point, but that didn't seem healthy to them. So it is still progressing science as of extremely currently. So this information could have literally changed in the time that I heard this. But they did say that when they were reunited, that didn't feel healthy, so they split up again. And now they sort of feel in a more healthy mental position now that they are separated again. Everything else that you guys mentioned, I sort of agreed with. The points about maybe it's a fractured soul, could be said as an argument, but the part where the original consciousness, or would be I think would be referred to as the original alter, completely disappears. And my friend, their original alter actually completely disappeared, but then did come back later. So it's just an interesting did that soul leave? What all happened to that soul? And it's kind of cool that you said that that's the first time you've ever heard that argument. It's really cool that I thought of it, probably not first, but originally on my own.
No, but give yourself a pat on the back. I agree. That's really cool.
Yeah. We usually get arguments about when people suffer traumatic brain injuries, or when they have surgeries that take place that separate. Was it the corpus callosum? I think I saw someone in the chat making some comment about it. We usually get that kind of stuff, right? But this is kind of a new one. But I think as this study of brain science becomes more sophisticated, as we're able to get more detailed scans, as we're able to interpret that data using the various technologies that are now amazingly at our doorstep, we'll have a better understanding of what's going on. But that subjective experience that your friend reported is always going to be a different thing, right? We may have different explanations, but the feeling of being separated, not knowing about it, feeling like it's completely suppressed or gone, and then coming back. That's kind of like the experience that we have as individuals. Having that phenomenological experience is very different from maybe the neurological experience that we can measure and sort of tinker around with. But
yeah, and like so many psychological disorders, we might pin down what one person has, and then it manifests totally differently with someone else. So it's interesting, what you mentioned about your friend's experience. And I don't think it's unwise to be like, wow, you learned a lot from them. But also the next person might have a totally different experience with the same disorder. So yeah, fascinating though.
Thank you, Quentin. You take care. You have a great rest of your weekend.